Ethan Thompson stood on the cracked sidewalk of Mapleton, Ohio, squinting at the golden morning sun filtering through the budding cherry blossoms. Spring had arrived with all its fanfare. A chorus of birds, a faint breeze carrying the scent of damp earth, and puddles left over from last night's rain that reflected the suburban charm of the town. Mapleton was modest but proud, two-story clapboard houses with porches adorned in pastel rocking chairs, flower boxes spilling over with daffodils and tulips, and lawns meticulously tended by residents who treated grass like a civic duty. Ethan, 35, was dressed in a faded green hoodie over a t-shirt, jeans streaked with mud from his early morning jog, and scuffed sneakers. He scratched the back of his neck as Baxter, his golden retriever, trotted alongside him, tongue lolling, clearly thrilled at the prospect of neighborhood exploration. Today, however, the spectacle that caught Ethan's attention wasn't the usual Mapleton hustle of joggers, newspaper deliveries, or Mr. Higgins' prideful lawn gnomes. It was a mother duck, quacking insistently, her line of fluffy yellow ducklings wobbling precariously behind her as she navigated the curb, the asphalt, and an unfortunate puddle that looked suspiciously deep for a creature barely the size of a softball. In life, sometimes you're the mother duck, sometimes you're the duckling, and sometimes you're the guy in green watching from the sidewalk, silently judging everyone's navigation skills. Ethan crouched down for a closer look. The ducklings were, predictably, chaos incarnate. One slipped sideways into a puddle, another tried to fly before the rest, and a third seemed determined to explore an ominously large ant hill. The mother quacked sharply, flapping wings with authority, and slowly, the scattered baby ducks rallied. Ethan chuckled. Teamwork, huh? He muttered. Baxter barked as if in agreement. The morning grew busier. On the corner, Mrs. Patel, wrapped in a floral scarf and carrying her small terrier, waved to Ethan. She called out, "Looks like Mapleton's new daycare program is starting early." Ethan laughed. Daycare by duck, yes. Fee. Laughter and mild panic. Meanwhile, Tommy and Carl, Mapleton's infamous duo of retirees, appeared pushing a wheelbarrow filled with gardening tools. Carl leaned on a rake and said, "Ethan, you're witnessing the ultimate life lesson here. Leadership is loud quacks and puddle navigation." Tommy added, "And patience, don't forget patience. Lots of puddle patience." Ethan shook his head, smiling. The small-town absurdity, the quiet rituals of neighbors, and the slapstick bravery of nature combined into something unexpectedly profound. By mid-morning, the mother duck had led her brood across the street to the small pond in Mapleton Park. The journey was anything but linear. Cars slowed, some honked, and pedestrians navigated around the waddling procession. A child on a scooter stopped mid-motion to cheer on the ducklings. A jogger sidestepped and muttered something about urban wildlife chaos. Ethan followed at a safe distance, snapping photos with his phone, partly amused, partly inspired. At the pond, the ducks faced their first real challenge, a steep embankment into the water. One duckling skidded halfway, its tiny wings flailing, before tumbling into the shallow edge. The mother quacked insistently, circling, ensuring all her offspring joined. Ethan crouched by the reeds, watching the meticulous care, the gentle nudges, the encouragement that required zero words. Observe the mother duck. No pep talks, no motivational posters, just persistent, patient guidance. There's a lesson here. Leadership isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just showing the way, one wobbly step at a time. By noon, a small crowd had gathered. Mapleton residents, always fond of impromptu events, watched as the ducklings practiced diving, jumping off small rocks, and following Mom in precise zigzags through lily pads. Ethan found himself explaining the scene to Baxter, who seemed more interested in chasing his own reflection than the actual lesson in teamwork. "See, buddy," Ethan said, pointing at the pond, "that's what a team looks like. One leader, a bunch of followers, and chaos that somehow works out." A young boy, Lucas Bennett, tugged at his mother's hand. "Mom, can we have ducklings in our pond at home?" Lucas' mother, laughing, replied, "Maybe when we learn to clean up after ourselves as well as these ducks do." Ethan realized that the spectacle was more than a literal observation, it was symbolic. Everyone in Mapleton, in their own way, was following someone, being led, contributing, or learning how to navigate puddles in life. Afternoon arrived with light rain, soft enough to form reflections on the water without scattering the ducklings' journey. Ethan, now damp but unbothered, sat on a bench, notebook in hand. He started jotting down observations. Leadership is patient, persistent, and sometimes silent. Teamwork requires trust, even when the path is slippery. Chaos is inevitable. Humor helps. Small victories matter, Each duckling safely in water counts. Meanwhile, Tommy and Carl arrived with umbrellas, debating loudly whether ducks preferred jazz or classical music. A jogger tripped over a sprinkler hose and landed in a puddle nearby. Baxter barked happily at the chaos. Ethan laughed, noting how messy teamwork could be, and how essential laughter was to survive it. As evening approached, the mother duck had led all her ducklings safely across the pond, teaching them swimming, diving, and group cohesion. Ethan observed, amazed at the quiet effectiveness of her leadership. He turned to Baxter. "You know, life's a lot like that pond. Everyone's figuring it out. Some days you're the leader, some days you're the wobbly duckling, and sometimes you're just watching and learning. And if you can survive the puddles, the chaos, and the unexpected splash zones, you might just learn something important. About teamwork, patience, and not taking yourself too seriously." The scene ended with the sun setting, casting golden reflections across Mapleton Park. Ducks glided through calm water, the mother quacking softly, as if congratulating herself on a job well done. Residents began heading home, sharing stories of the impromptu event, laughing at slips and tumbles, inspired by something as simple as a duck leading her young across a pond. Ethan walked home with Baxter trailing, a quiet smile on his face, feeling a lightness he hadn't in weeks. Mapleton, in all its ordinary splendor, had delivered a profound lesson in teamwork, playful, chaotic, and utterly American. The next morning in Mapleton, Ohio, dawn arrived with a gentle drizzle, soft enough to glisten on rooftops without damping spirits. Puddles mirrored the pastel-colored houses, their porches adorned with flower boxes and wind chimes swaying in the light breeze. Ethan Thompson laced up his scuffed sneakers, tugged his green hoodie over his t-shirt, and opened the door to a freshly awake neighborhood. Baxter, ever loyal, bounded ahead, splashing through puddles with unrestrained joy. Ethan's mind was already on the day ahead. The community pond was hosting Mapleton's annual Spring Clean and Swim, a local tradition where residents volunteer to clean and maintain the pond and its surroundings. This year, Ethan had volunteered, well, technically, he had been volunteered by Mrs. Patel, whose subtle social pressure was legendary. Today, however, he had a different goal: teaching teamwork, inspired by the ducklings he had watched yesterday. By 9:30 a.m., a lively group of volunteers had assembled: Tommy and Carl, wheelbarrow in tow, Lucas Bennett and his mother, a handful of high schoolers, and even Judy Sanders, carrying homemade muffins in her ever-present red tote. The pond, surrounded by flowering dogwoods, looked deceptively calm, though the ducks, now fully aware of Ethan's presence, quacked suspiciously from their usual nesting area. Ethan clapped his hands to get attention. "All right, team," he said, grinning despite a lingering sense of mild panic. "We have mud, sticks, leaves, and possibly a very judgmental flock of ducks. Remember what we learned yesterday: coordination, patience, and occasional chaos is okay. It's funny, isn't it? People say leadership is about giving orders. But sometimes it's more about quacking loudly, letting others fall into puddles, and hoping everyone learns something before the snack break." The volunteers dispersed to tackle tasks. Lucas and a couple of teenagers collected fallen branches along the pond's edge, Judy and Mrs. Patel organized supplies, and Tommy and Carl worked on clearing debris with questionable efficiency and maximum commentary. The first slapstick challenge arose when Ethan attempted to haul a large, waterlogged log from the pond. The log, heavier than anticipated, rolled unexpectedly, sending him splashing into a shallow puddle, water soaking his hoodie and jeans. Baxter barked in what seemed like encouragement or judgment. "Teamwork," Ethan shouted, laughing through the drizzle. "This is teamwork in action." Carl, pretending to coach, offered, "Logan, Ethan, remember, the mother duck never fell in the puddle. You might be setting a new precedent." Even the ducklings from yesterday, now slightly larger and wobbly but confident, paddled nearby, perfectly synchronized. Ethan couldn't help but chuckle. Somehow, nature had a way of demonstrating efficiency he could only aspire to. By late morning, the pond had been partially cleaned, leaves raked, small branches removed, and mud redistributed to form smoother edges. Ethan noticed the ducklings following their mother along the newly cleared banks, their coordinated waddling now a visible demonstration of yesterday's lesson. He turned to the volunteers. "See that?" he said, gesturing to the ducks. "Follow a good leader, trust the team, and you can make it across any puddle, log, or life obstacle." Lucas frowned. "But what if someone falls behind?" Ethan smiled. "Then we help them. That's the point of a team. Leadership and teamwork aren't about perfection. They're about commitment to each other, picking up the stragglers, laughing when mistakes happen, and celebrating the small victories along the way. As the afternoon sun broke through clouds, Mapleton residents continued their symphony of chaos. A group of teenagers attempted to relocate a stubborn rock from the pond's edge, only for it to slip and send muddy water splashing across Ethan's legs. Judy's muffins were accidentally knocked over by Baxter, sending chocolate chips rolling into puddles. Even Tommy and Carl managed to tangle themselves in garden hoses, providing comic relief for everyone except themselves. Despite the absurdity, the progress was undeniable. Sections of the pond were cleaner, water rippling peacefully, and the ducks glided effortlessly along the cleared paths. The volunteers, muddy and wet but smiling, moved in unspoken rhythm, guided not by perfect planning but by shared commitment. Ethan paused, observing the scene. This, he said, half to himself and half to Baxter, is exactly what teamwork looks like. It's messy, loud, unpredictable, and it works. By late afternoon, a symbolic moment arrived. Ethan had gathered the volunteers at the pond edge for a final crossing exercise, guiding a small raft of floating toys across the pond. The mother duck, quacking softly, led her ducklings through the same path. Ethan mirrored their method, patient nudges, careful guidance, and letting the team find its own rhythm. One teenager tipped the raft prematurely, sending a splashing cascade over everyone. Ethan and the group erupted in laughter. Baxter jumped into a puddle nearby, adding to the chaos. Lucas, initially cautious, laughed so hard he nearly fell into the pond. Sometimes, the lesson isn't about getting to the other side perfectly. It's about laughing when you fall, helping each other back up, and realizing that chaos is just another form of progress. As the sun began to set, painting the pond in shades of orange and pink, Ethan noticed how the small community had transformed the space. Leaves were cleared, debris removed, and the ducks, mother and offspring alike, glided along smooth water, perfectly synchronized, a literal and symbolic demonstration of the day's labor. Ethan looked at Baxter. We did good, buddy. Ducks, volunteers, mud, chaos, everybody wins. Mrs. Patel, wiping her hands on her scarf, smiled. It's incredible what a little teamwork can accomplish. And a lot of laughter. Ethan nodded, watching the ducks dive and resurface, a perfect metaphor for life. Small failures, brief submersions, and triumphant re-emergence. So remember, when life feels chaotic, when puddles appear where you least expect them, when your team seems to wobble and flail, take a lesson from the ducklings. Follow the leader, support each other, laugh at mistakes, and keep paddling. Leadership is guidance, teamwork is trust, and sometimes, the smallest creatures can teach the biggest lessons. As darkness settled over Mapleton, lights flicked on in homes lining the streets. Ducks disappeared into nests for the night. Volunteers trudged home, muddy and smiling. And Ethan Thompson, a little wetter and a little wiser, knew that teamwork, messy, imperfect, and full of laughter, was the secret ingredient to life's little victories.
Daily happiness and motivation is hidden in. Like and subscribe.